What are the consequences of getting the facts wrong? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. The CBC reports that a false claim about the fate of detained Iranian protesters shared on social media by even Justin Trudeau and other famous figures has drawn criticism from human rights experts who say that it could undermine the uprising against Iran's regime. So, what's this all about? Let's begin with some background. More than 15,000 people have been arrested for participating in anti-government protest over the past 8 weeks in Iran, and this all was sparked by the death of a 22-year-old woman, Masha Amini, who was in police custody after she was arrested for allegedly failing to wear her hijab properly. And it goes without saying that's asinine. That's completely... I have some strong choices of words that I could use there, but to get the message across, that's deplorable. Whenever I see authoritarian regimes power tripping, I am always on the side of the people and the populace. Now, these protests did become a movement and they spread across the entire country, with demands for greater freedom and the overthrowing of Iran's government. And this was met with a bloody crackdown from the government, and it's killed at least 328 people, likely more, as we can't expect the data to be clear coming out of there, including 50 children. And now, to get back to the tweet we were talking about, or the content that came out, in a since-deleted tweet, Trudeau on Monday denounced the Iranian regime's barbaric decision to impose the death penalty on nearly 15,000 protesters, and that was the confusion. According to official news sources in Iran, and even external observers, upward of 2,000 people have been charged over their alleged involvement with the protest, including at least 20 who are facing charges that could carry the death penalty. And on top of that, a total of 5 protesters currently face the death penalty, including 3 protesters who were sentenced on Wednesday. And this was reported by state media, which obviously is not the most trustworthy, but also foreign news outlets. So, to go over this, Trudeau and many others were wrong. It seems like 15,000 protesters are not going to be put to death, at least not yet. It seems like that number is closer to 20, but around 2,000 have been charged, to some degree, with being involved in the protest. That itself is deplorable. There is no reason to get caught up in hysteria and potentially lie about the facts at hand. 2,000 people arrested for protesting, 20 of them potentially going to die because of it. That's outrageous in and of itself. But when we get the facts wrong, there are consequences. Experts say that while the misinformation shared by Trudeau and others is unfortunate, it should not overshadow the severe consequences that protesters could face, still including potential death penalties, or the Iranian government's harsh efforts to stop dissent. And that's true. It shouldn't overshadow that, but it just might. Many people are more caught up in the figures getting it wrong than the actual facts on the ground. Experts on human rights in Iran were also concerned by this false information. When they see it shared by a Western leader like Trudeau, it's very possible that the Iranian government would play into that. They would put out a narrative that the protests were a foreign plot to destabilize the country. Look at that Western leader over there, lying about us. What else are they lying about? It's conspiracy theory material, and they're going to leverage that. And some people are going to get confused by it. This is what happens when you set the stage poorly. They can just point at you and say, "We caught them lying. The tweet has been deleted. They're not trustworthy. Don't believe them." The importance of facts and being precise cannot be understated. And the same was true in virtually every other circumstance, including the COVID-19 pandemic, when leaders and scientists and people of that stature were caught spreading misinformation. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, telling the population not to wear a mask because it's useless, and then doing a 180 a couple months after, telling you it's vital. People lose trust in what you're saying. And the reasons for that confusion could be valid. Like in this case, Trudeau was misled by news sources. He wasn't making it up, but still, these things have consequences and the reactions to it are likely not going to be in your favor. Now, Iranian state officials also were trolling Trudeau. They took to Twitter, and some of them posted pictures depicting him in clown makeup and labeling him a prime minister who is a quote-unquote fake news maker, while another called Trudeau's deletion, which came after about 11 hours of the tweet being put up, an obvious retreat. So you can see they're pouncing on this opportunity to make it about Trudeau, and not about the protesters who they're treating egregiously. There are a lot of underlying issues here that we could talk about. For example, how quickly incorrect information can spread on social media. And oftentimes people like to think that it's coming from obscure places like the far right, or whoever else is living in conspiracy land, la la land. But here's an example of prominent figures who you might even like getting caught up in the hysteria. Seeing something on social media without the proper context or background work and jumping onto the bandwagon. This happens all the time. As a resident, you have to be critical of the things you see online. You have to think about things dispassionately. You have to be logical. And you have to do research. And if that's what I'm asking for from the average citizen, imagine my standard for the government and Trudeau. They have to do far more to vet what they're saying. The consequences of them getting it wrong are dramatic. Now, I will say though, once faced with the unfortunate circumstance of realizing that material you've put out is incorrect, Trudeau did the best thing possible, even though it's not ideal. He did delete the tweet. It was an obvious blunder, but he owned up to it. The worst thing you can do is double down. Some people do this. They're caught in the wrong, and instead of acknowledging that, they just ignore the facts and they buy into their fake narrative. Trudeau could have gone and said, no, Iran is lying to you. They are killing the protesters. And then it'd be a constant back and forth of who's lying and who's telling the truth here. At the very least, Trudeau has operated in a manner where the seeming truth of the matter can arise. In some ways, this is the benefit of something like free speech. It's the opportunity to learn. You say something, and you realize it's wrong. Other people correct you, and then you improve. Going forward now, you're that much closer to the truth. If you weren't allowed to say anything, you might be operating under false guises. Now, there are a couple more questions that we all have which seemingly have not been answered yet. How did the media get this wrong? Was it a question of a poor translation? Was it them operating based on conjecture? A bad source? I'm not sure. But it does bring up questions about journalistic standards which have been degrading dramatically over the past couple decades. The media has to be held to a higher standard. They have to go back to operating based on fact. The emotional responses that we're seeing allow for mistakes like this to happen more frequently. It seems like the best description for media these days is activism, not truth-telling. And there's a big distinction between those two things. And we edge closer and closer to the former, day after day. Now, to zoom out for a second, if we're talking about the Iran protesting situation, we do have to understand that these individuals deserve our full support. And I would argue it's for the same reason why Ukrainians deserve our full support against Russia. These are individuals who are obviously advocating for their own interest, but those interests massively align with ours. A force like Iran is not a force for good in this world. We can see that through their treatment of women, for example, or for another case, homosexuals. And here's a litmus test that you can run to make this clear to you. Take a woman that you love, who's in your life, and ask yourself if you would be happy with their decision to move to Iran permanently. If you think that would be good for her. Run the same thing for anyone who is homosexual that's in your life. Would it be good for them to move there? Would you be happy to hear about that? And that can reveal to you the difference between where we are and where other countries are when it comes to acceptance and getting to a more egalitarian society state. There's also the geopolitical factor of war making. Russia is an aggressive actor. Iran in many ways is one as well. Their attempts to develop things like nuclear weaponry are not something that we can condone or accept. Now, whether or not you agree with pulling out of the nuclear arms treaty that America had with them is beside the point. This has already happened. We have to figure out how to move forward here, and an attempt from the populace to install a more modern government system is something that we should be supporting. The people are calling for it. This is not a case of a Western government trying to impose its way of life on another country. This is the constituents of that country calling for it and their government rejecting that notion. Now, as always, I'll keep you up to date on the latest and how the situation continues to unfold. And with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.